My name is Emily Carter. I'm 24 years old, and I live in Dallas, Texas. Right now, I work as a junior marketing assistant for a mid-sized tech company. To most people, it's an entry-level role. To me, it was my first real chance at independence, my first step toward building a life that wasn't controlled by anyone else. If I had to define myself with one word, it would be resilient, because I've had to be. The night I told my parents about my new job, expecting pride and congratulations, they didn't clap. They didn't smile. They laughed. My father leaned back and said, "A cheap job for a cheap dreamer." My mother smirked. "Don't expect us to brag about this." They thought I'd stay small forever. They never expected the day a helicopter with my company's logo would land, and I'd be the one stepping out. If you're listening, please take a second to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And I want to ask you something personal. Has your family ever mocked your ambitions? Have they ever made you feel small before you had the chance to prove them wrong? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to know where you're watching from. That dinner was supposed to be a celebration. I had rehearsed the way I'd tell them, how I'd explain the importance of this job, the kind of clients my team worked with, the doors it could open. Instead, I sat there frozen, their laughter echoing in my ears like a cruel refrain. Heather, my younger sister, raised her glass of wine and said with a smirk, "Don't worry, Em. Maybe one day you'll get promoted to coffee fetcher." The table erupted again. I tried to laugh it off, to swallow the hurt, but my hands were trembling under the tablecloth. Because this wasn't new. It had always been this way. From the outside, the Carters looked perfect. My dad was a corporate lawyer, sharp suits and expensive watches. My mom ran charity galas, her name often in the local society pages. Heather was their golden child, cheerleader, social butterfly, now the proud owner of a brand new Tesla. And me? I was the afterthought, the serious one, the cheap dreamer, the one who was always too plain, too cautious, too small for the pedestal they built for themselves. As I sat there, the laughter echoing, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to face before. This wasn't just harmless teasing. This was who they were, people who measured worth in titles and price tags. People who would never see my resilience, my fight, my determination, as anything but weakness. I pushed back my chair that night and excused myself early. My mom rolled her eyes. My dad muttered, "Always so dramatic." Heather smirked, but as I walked away, one thought burned in my chest like fire. One day they'll regret laughing at me, and I had no idea then. That their cruelty would push me further than I ever imagined. That it would become the spark for everything I was about to build, because the girl they mocked at that dinner table? She was about to become the woman who made the world stop and stare. From the outside, people thought my family was the definition of success. Our house sat in a Dallas suburb lined with perfectly trimmed lawns, the kind of neighborhood where every mailbox matched and every driveway glittered with cars polished to a shine. Neighbors waved at my father when he pulled up in his sleek black BMW, nodding in admiration. At every block party or charity event, my mother glided through the room, diamonds flashing, her voice dripping with pride as she bragged about Heather's latest accomplishments. And me? I usually hovered at the edges of the room, holding a drink, forcing a polite smile. If anyone asked about me, my mom's answers were vague, dismissive. "Oh, Emily? She's working somewhere in marketing. But Heather just..." And then the spotlight turned, always on Heather. Heather was the star. The cheerleader in high school. The girl who got her first car on her 16th birthday, a brand new red convertible, a ribbon tied across the hood like something out of a movie. My dad popped the champagne in the driveway while the neighbors clapped. When I turned 16, I got, well, not a car, not even a party. My dad handed me an old flip phone and muttered, "Don't lose it." My mom told me to be grateful. That was the rhythm of our house. Heather celebrated. Emily tolerated. When Heather barely passed her SATs, my parents hired her a tutor, bought her study guides, and still threw her a congratulations dinner for trying. When I scored near perfect, my dad shrugged and said, Grades don't mean much in the real world. Every Sunday we had a family dinner. Roast chicken, potatoes, and my mom's famous peach cobbler. On the surface, it looked like the kind of tradition families cherish. But for me, Sundays became a stage where I played the role of the family joke. Heather would arrive with some new story, her weekend trip, her shopping spree, her dates. My parents would beam, hanging on her every word. Then, inevitably, their eyes would land on me. "So, Emily," my dad would say, "how's the cheap job?" He always said it with that little pause, like even remembering where I worked was too much effort. I'd try to share something real. Like the time I stayed up until 2 a.m. finalizing a campaign pitch, and my manager said I had a sharp eye for strategy. But before I finished, Heather would laugh, lean across the table, and say, "So basically you made ads?" "Cute," Mom would chuckle and pass the potatoes. Dad would shake his head like I'd just told a bad joke. Every Sunday ended with me pushing food around my plate, silent, while they laughed about Heather's life. The cracks turned into fractures the night Heather drove up in her Tesla. She was 22 then, fresh out of college with no job yet. But my parents insisted she deserved a luxury car to give her confidence. I remember standing on the porch, watching her squeal as Dad jingled the keys in front of her. She threw her arms around him, hair bouncing, and shouted, "Thanks, Daddy!" I whispered, mostly to myself, "I'll buy my own car one day," Heather overheard. She turned, her eyes gleaming, and said with a smirk, "Maybe you'll be able to afford a used one, Em." My parents laughed. Not just a chuckle, a full, sharp laugh that cut into me deeper than any insult. That night, I lay awake in my room, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I really was small. Maybe the job I worked so hard for was worthless. Maybe I'd never rise above the cheap jokes and smirks. But then something inside me snapped. I sat up, clenched my fists, and whispered to myself, "One day, they'll choke on their laughter. One day, I'll prove them wrong." I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But the fire started that night. And I couldn't shake the feeling that their cruelty wasn't finished. Because if they could mock my job and my worth so easily, what would they do when I actually started to climb? I didn't know it yet, but their next move would be the sharpest cut of all. At first, I told myself it was just teasing. Family's joke, right? But somewhere along the way, the jokes started cutting deeper, turning into something sharper. Something deliberate. One Sunday, after a long week at work, I sat down at the table feeling hopeful. I had just been praised for my first major client campaign. Andrew, my manager, said my strategy had bumped conversions by 9%. It wasn't flashy like Heather's car, but it mattered. So I tried to share. "I actually got some recognition at work," I began, my voice cautious but proud. My manager said, Mom cut me off with a sigh, setting down her fork. "Marketing recognition? What is that, flyers and coupons?" Heather nearly spat out her wine from laughing. "It's not like that," I tried. "It's digital campaigns." Dad waved his hand, chuckling. "Doesn't matter, Emily. It's still a cheap job." "Anyone can make posters online." My cheeks burned. "It's not cheap to me." Heather smirked, leaning in with mock sympathy. Don't be so sensitive. You know we're just joking." But her eyes told me the truth. She wasn't joking at all. The next weekend, Heather hosted a party. The house glowed with lights, music thumping, laughter spilling out into the street. Neighbors came, cousins came, even Mom and Dad toasted with champagne in the backyard. Me? I only found out when I saw the photos on Instagram. Heather in a glittery dress, arms around friends, captions like, "Best night ever." My parents are grinning in the background. When I asked Mom later why I hadn't been invited, she gave me that dismissive wave. "Oh, Emily, it was Heather's night. We didn't think you'd be interested." Didn't think or didn't care. A few days later, Heather offered me a ride home from work. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was trying to be kind. But halfway through the drive, she locked eyes with me at a red light, a smirk curling her lips. "You know, Em, you should really think about a real career. Dad could get you a paralegal position at his firm. At least then you wouldn't embarrass the family." I swallowed. "I don't embarrass the family. Heather snorted. Please, you think clients are impressed by your… what? Instagram ads? Face it, you'll never be more than background noise. The light turned green, but the weight of her words sat heavily on my chest. That night, as I headed upstairs, I froze outside my parents' bedroom door. Their voices drifted through, low, sharp. She's wasting her time, Dad muttered. She'll never be Heather. She needs to learn the hard way, Mom replied. It's the only way she'll stop embarrassing us. Maybe we push her into something stable. Paralegal school. At least then she won't drag the family name down. I pressed my hand to the wall, my pulse racing. Learn the hard way? So it wasn't just careless jokes anymore. It wasn't just neglect. They were planning something I wasn't prepared for. The next morning at breakfast, Mom poured me coffee with the sweetest smile. Good morning, honey. Sleep well? I stared at her, words lodged in my throat. She looked at me like everything was normal, like I hadn't heard her plotting to erase my future. Heather breezed in, kissed Mom's cheek, and grabbed her car keys. Don't forget, Dad. I need money for that shopping trip later. Of course, sweetheart, Dad said, reaching for his wallet. Then his eyes flicked to me. And you, Emily, don't be late for your little job. You wouldn't want to disappoint your manager. Their laughter followed me out the door. I thought the mockery was bad enough. But I had no idea then that they weren't just planning to humiliate me. They were planning something bigger. And when they finally acted, it would break me wide open. The betrayal came dressed as a celebration. Heather had been accepted into a prestigious graduate program, and my parents decided to throw a party in her honor. The invitations went out weeks in advance. They even had a catered menu, a live band, and a rented ballroom downtown. For once, I thought maybe I'd finally be included. I dressed carefully, a simple navy dress, heels, my hair curled just enough. It wasn't flashy, but it was me. I told myself, maybe tonight they'll treat me like family. I was wrong. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, chandeliers sparkling overhead. Guests sipped champagne, laughter echoing against marble walls. I sat at a table near the back, watching Heather glow like a queen as people fawned over her. Dad took the microphone first. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming to celebrate my daughter Heather's incredible achievement. Applause filled the room. I clapped too, even though my chest felt tight. Then Dad's tone shifted, playful at first, but edged with cruelty. Of course, we also have our other daughter Emily here tonight. She's working hard in marketing. A ripple of laughter spread. Heather smirked at me across the room. Dad continued, his grin wide. We've always said one child would shine and the other… Well, let's just say someone has to hand out the flyers, right? More laughter. Some nervous, some genuine. My face burned. I wanted to disappear. After the toast, I tried to sneak outside for air. But Mom caught me by the arm, her nails digging lightly into my skin. Don't look so upset, she hissed. This is Heather's night. Learn your place. My place? My voice cracked. Mom's eyes hardened. Yes, don't embarrass us. Just smile, clap, and stay in the background where you belong. I pulled away, my chest pounding, my eyes stinging, as if the night wasn't cruel enough. Heather made sure to twist the knife. Later, while chatting with her friends, she suddenly raised her glass and called out across the room, Emily! Come take a picture with me? For a second, hope sparked. Maybe she was including me? I hurried over, awkward but eager. But as I reached her side, she whispered with a smirk, Try not to ruin this, okay? The photographer counted down. 3, 2… Right as the flash went off, Heather tripped. Her wine glass tipped, red liquid spilling down the front of my navy dress. Gasps filled the room. Oh my God, Emily. Heather exclaimed, feigning shock. You really should be more careful. Laughter erupted again. I stood there, drenched, humiliated, every eye on me. I rushed to the restroom, scrubbing at the stain. The mirror reflected a version of me I barely recognized. Mascara streaking, lips trembling, eyes red. When I emerged, Dad intercepted me. Honestly, Emily, he muttered, shaking his head. Why do you always have to be such a disaster? Heather deserves the spotlight, and you can't even manage to stand beside her without messing it up. I whispered, my voice shaking. It wasn't my fault. He leaned closer, his tone sharp as glass. Everything is your fault. Those words pierced deeper than any laughter. By the time dessert arrived, I couldn't stomach another second. I quietly gathered my bag and slipped toward the exit, but Mom's voice rang out across the room. Leaving already, Emily? Big day at the coupon factory tomorrow? The guests chuckled. Heather covered her mouth as if she couldn't contain her laughter. Heat flooded my body, shame, rage, heartbreak, all mixing until I felt dizzy. I didn't answer. I just walked out. The sound of their laughter followed me into the night. Standing outside that ballroom, red wine still clinging to my dress, I realized something chilling. They didn't just see me as a failure, they wanted me to believe it. And for the first time, I almost did. But that night was also the beginning of something else. The night they broke me was the night I started to imagine what it would take to rise. The cold air outside the ballroom stung my face as I stepped into the dark parking lot. The muffled music and laughter spilled out every time the doors swung open behind me. But out here, it was just me, and the silence was deafening. I pressed my back against a stone pillar, sliding down until the rough concrete bit into the skin behind my knees. My dress was still damp, sticky with wine, and my body trembled from the mix of humiliation and fury boiling inside me. I buried my face in my hands. Why do they hate me so much? The parking lot stretched empty, save for a few gleaming cars that no doubt belonged to Heather's friends. I had taken the bus here, a humiliating fact Heather hadn't hesitated to remind me of earlier that evening. The night felt colder the longer I sat there. My phone buzzed once. My best friend Lily had texted. Lily, how's the party? I stared at the screen, my throat closing up. What could I even say? That my dad had mocked me in front of hundreds of people? That my sister had accidentally drenched me in wine? That my mom had all but called me trash? Instead, I typed 2 words. Heading home. I didn't want to explain. Not yet. The bus ride back was quiet, only the occasional chatter of strangers breaking the silence. I sat by the window, staring at the blurred city lights, replaying every word my parents had said. You'll never be more than ordinary. Everything is your fault. Stay in the background where you belong. Each sentence cut deeper than the last, looping in my head until I felt raw and hollow. When I got to my apartment, a tiny studio with peeling paint and a radiator that hissed like it was angry at me, I collapsed onto the bed. My clothes still smelled like wine, but I didn't care. I cried until my chest hurt. At some point, the tears ran dry. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of traffic below filling the silence. For the first time, I thought about quitting my job, quitting my efforts, quitting everything. I whispered into the darkness, voice trembling. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'll never be enough. The words hung there, heavy. The next morning, a pounding at my door jolted me awake. My head throbbed from crying, my eyes swollen. Emily, open up! It was Lily. I dragged myself out of bed and cracked the door. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Oh my God, Em. What happened? I shook my head, trying to hold back tears again. She stepped inside, shutting the door firmly. Talk to me now, so I did. I told her everything. Every cruel word, every laugh, every humiliation from last night. When I finished, Lily's face was flushed with anger. Emily, she said firmly, you cannot let them define you. Her conviction startled me. But what if they're right? I whispered, voice shaking. She grabbed my shoulders, looking me dead in the eyes. They're not right. You're brilliant. You've been building things since college. You're the most creative person I know. You're just... She paused, her voice softening. Too scared to show them. Her words lit something inside me. A flicker. Small, but real. After Lily left, I sat at my desk staring at my laptop. For months, I'd been working on something quietly, an idea for a digital branding agency, one that specialized in helping small businesses tell their story in big ways. I had clients, a few at least. Coffee shops, a local boutique, and a startup that could barely afford me but trusted me with everything. I had been downplaying it, calling it just freelance work when my parents asked. But sitting there, Lily's words echoing in my head, I realized it wasn't just anything. It was mine. Maybe it wasn't glamorous yet. Maybe it didn't look like much compared to Heather's grad program or Dad's corporate ladder, but it was real. And if I could survive last night, the laughter, the humiliation, the shame, then maybe I could survive turning this tiny spark into something bigger. I leaned forward, typing a new email to a potential client I'd been too afraid to approach before. My fingers shook, but I pressed send anyway. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reacting to their cruelty. I was acting for myself. They had broken me last night. But tonight, I decided I wouldn't stay broken. The email I sent that night changed everything. It wasn't a magic fix. The boutique owner didn't reply right away. The next morning, the radiator still groaned. The bills still sat on my counter, and the echo of my dad's laughter still haunted me. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I was building for myself. The boutique did write back, 3 days later. And she said yes. I took on the project, pouring myself into the design of their campaign. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't even tell Heather. I learned something important. My success didn't need their validation. 1 client became 3. 3 became 6. Soon I was juggling more projects than I ever had before. My nights filled with glowing screens and coffee cups stacked like trophies. I'd sit there at 2 a.m., exhausted but buzzing with purpose, whispering to myself, they don't know what's coming. But I also knew that for my revenge to mean something, for it to last, I couldn't do it alone. That's where Lily came in. She had always been more than a friend. She was my anchor. When I told her I wanted to turn my side hustle into a full agency, her eyes lit up. "You're finally saying it out loud," she said, grinning. "It's about time." We brainstormed together, scribbling ideas on napkins at our favorite diner. Lily had a knack for strategy. She pointed out gaps I hadn't noticed, pushed me to think bigger. And then there was Marcus. He had been a mentor during my college internship, a marketing executive who had quietly cheered me on even when I felt invisible. I reached out nervously, half expecting him to ignore me, but his reply was instant. "Emily, I've been waiting for you to make this move. Let's talk." I started keeping records. Every client, every contract, every invoice. Not because I needed to prove myself to strangers, but because one day, I knew I'd need to prove myself to the people who had written me off completely. My parents thrived on dismissing me. They lived for those cutting remarks at dinner, those smug glances when Heather flaunted another achievement. This time, I'd have evidence. Not just words, numbers, success in black and white. Just as my agency began to take shape, another letter arrived at my apartment. It was from my parents. A heavy ivory envelope. Embossed with gold lettering, Heather's engagement party. I froze. She hadn't called me. She hadn't even texted. But here was an invitation, as if it were a formality, a reminder that I was expected to show up and play the role of the background character in her story. My stomach twisted. I could already imagine Dad's booming laugh, Mom's thinly veiled insults, Heather's triumphant smirk, but this time, a thought occurred to me. Maybe I could turn it around. I didn't RSVP right away. Instead, I worked harder, doubling my hours, building a presentation that would silence anyone who dared call me ordinary again. I upgraded my branding, polished my website, and even printed business cards that shimmered with elegance. And then, with Lily's help, I reached out to a high-profile client that Heather's fiancé's company had been chasing. It was a bold move, risky, almost reckless. But I knew what I was doing. When they signed with me instead, I nearly screamed into my pillow. This wasn't just a win. It was leverage, because now when Heather's party came around, I wasn't just Emily the waitress. I was Emily, the woman running a company big enough to steal her future husband's business deal right out from under her. The night before the party, I laid out my outfit. It wasn't designed. It wasn't flashy, but it was sharp, professional, and confident. As I set my business cards into my clutch, my hands trembled, not with fear, but anticipation. This wasn't just a family gathering anymore. It was a stage. And tomorrow, they would see me, not as the failure they mocked, but as the storm they never saw coming. The engagement party glowed with chandeliers and crystal glasses, every surface screaming money and perfection. Heather loved a spectacle, and this one was no different. I slipped through the double doors, my heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. For a second I hesitated. The familiar wave of inadequacy threatened to crash over me. Then I pressed a hand against my clutch, feeling the sharp edges of the business cards tucked inside. This wasn't their battlefield anymore. It was mine. Heather spotted me first. She swept across the room in a sequined gown, a glass of champagne already in hand. "Emily," she smirked, her voice carrying far louder than necessary. "I didn't think you'd come. Do you even own a dress that isn't from the clearance rack?" A ripple of laughter echoed from the circle of cousins gathered around her. The old me would have flushed, looked down, maybe even fled, but tonight, I lifted my chin. "Actually," I said calmly, "I had this tailored. For an occasion worth attending," the laughter faltered, just slightly. But I noticed, Heather blinked, caught off guard for the briefest second. Then she recovered, waving me off. Well, try not to spill anything this time. I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting. Instead, I smiled. A quiet, deliberate smile that told her I wasn't here to play the same role anymore. Later, I caught sight of Heather's fiancé, Daniel, standing near the bar with a group of executives. My pulse quickened. This was the moment I had planned for. I approached casually, as though I were simply passing by. One of the men turned toward me. "You're Emily, right? The one running agency name?" Daniel froze. I nodded smoothly. "Yes, that's me. We just signed with your firm's competitor, actually." They wanted fresh eyes on their branding. The executives lit up with interest, peppering me with questions about my work. Daniel's smile tightened with every sentence. I could feel his frustration radiating off him. Heather swooped in moments later, clinging to his arm. "Emily, don't bore them," she said sweetly, though her eyes flashed daggers. But it was too late. They were already asking for my card, and I handed them out. Calm, steady, deliberate. Of course, Dad couldn't resist making his move. Over dinner, as waiters placed plates of roasted lamb and truffle risotto in front of us, he raised his glass. "To Heather and Daniel," he boomed. "A match made in heaven, unlike some of us who still haven't figured out their path." The table chuckled. My mom gave me that look, that "see, he's right" look. But instead of shrinking, I set my fork down. "Actually, Dad," I said softly, but clearly enough for the table to hear, "I've been pretty busy building something of my own. A company," the room stilled. "A company." Mom's voice dripped with skepticism. "What kind of company?" I met her gaze evenly. "One that's already profitable. One that employs people. One that—" I let the words hang, smiling faintly. "Pays more than a waitress's wage." Her lips pressed into a thin line. It wasn't the full reveal, not yet. But the ripple it sent through the table was undeniable. By dessert, I noticed something remarkable. People were coming to me. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, acquaintances who usually ignored me, even a couple of Heather's college friends. "So you run your own agency? Could I get your card?" I've been looking for someone exactly like that for my business. The power shift was subtle but seismic. For the first time, they were the ones seeking me out. Heather's smile grew tighter by the minute. I could almost see the cracks forming in her perfect facade. As the evening wound down, Heather cornered me near the coat check. Her champagne glass was empty now, her smile brittle. "Don't think you're clever," she hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "This is my night, not yours." I leaned in, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Then maybe you should stop underestimating me." Her jaw dropped, stunned. For once, she had no quick retort. I walked away before she could recover, my heels clicking like punctuation marks on the marble floor. When I finally stepped into the cool night air, my heart was pounding, but not with fear this time. It was adrenaline, power, possibility. For the first time, I had turned their stage into mine, and this was only the beginning. The morning of Heather's wedding dawned bright and sharp. Like the world itself knew something monumental was about to happen. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, steady eyes, a dress that spoke of quiet power, and a heart that beat like a drum. This wasn't about proving myself anymore. This was about reclaiming every piece of me they had tried to destroy. The church parking lot buzzed with expensive cars and luxury SUVs. Guests in glittering gowns and tailored suits stepped out, clutching gift bags and whispering compliments. I arrived later than most, deliberately. Heads turned as I walked through the doors, but this time there was no smirk, no mocking laugh, only curiosity. Something about the way I carried myself made people pause. I could feel Heather's glare from across the aisle, sharp enough to cut glass, but I wasn't here for her. Not yet. The vows dragged on, and I caught myself barely listening. My mind was already on what was waiting outside. Daniel's voice shook slightly as he said his "I do." Heather beamed, glowing in her designer gown, radiating triumph. And my parents? They looked at her with stars in their eyes, as though crowning their perfect child queen of the world. I sat silently in the back pew, my clutch resting in my lap. The weight of what was coming pressed against me like a secret only I could feel. When the priest finally announced, "You may kiss the bride," the crowd erupted in applause, but it was nothing compared to what was about to follow. We spilled outside into the courtyard. The air was filled with chatter, laughter, and the distant sound of birdsong. Then, another sound cut through, the deep, rhythmic thrum of helicopter blades. At first, people shaded their eyes, squinting at the sky. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Who's that for?" And then it descended. Sleek, polished, and emblazoned on the side in bold gleaming letters was my company's logo. Gasps erupted. Phones came out, guests filming the spectacle like it was the climax of a movie. Heather's smile faltered. Daniel stiffened. My parents turned toward me, confusion etched across their faces. The helicopter touched down on the grass with a rush of wind that whipped dresses and sent champagne glasses toppling. The side door slid open, and it was waiting for me. I stepped forward, heels sinking slightly into the grass. Every eye followed me. Someone asked in disbelief, "Is that yours?" I smiled faintly. "Yes, it's here for me." My father's face drained of color. My mother clutched his arm, her lips parting soundlessly. Heather looked like she'd swallowed glass. The pilot stepped out, greeting me with a respectful nod. "Ms. Emily, we're ready when you are." Ms. Emily, not failure. Not a servant. Not background Ms. Emily, the CEO. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the chatter of the crowd had died away, leaving only the thrum of the blades. Then Daniel barked a laugh, forced and sharp. "This is some stunt." "What, you rented it for the day?" I turned to him slowly. "No, it's mine. And so is the company that just outbid your firm on that major contract." The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it, speechless. Heather grabbed his arm, her voice shrill. "She's lying. She's nothing." But the guests weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking at me, with awe, with respect. For the first time in my life, I didn't stay long enough for excuses, denials, or half-hearted apologies. I simply nodded to Lily, who had appeared by my side, grinning like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. We climbed into the helicopter together. The crowd shielded their faces as the wind picked up again, the roar filling the courtyard. Through the window, I saw my parents. My mother's hand was pressed against her mouth, my father frozen in shock. Heather stood rigid, trembling with fury, her veil whipping around her face, and I smiled, because this time, they were the ones left behind. As the helicopter lifted, the city spread beneath me, glittering in the afternoon sun. I wasn't just leaving the wedding, I was leaving the version of myself they had tried to chain down, and this was only the beginning of their downfall. The city below glittered as the helicopter carried me away, but the real storm was brewing back on the ground. I didn't need to be there to know it. By the time I touched down at the rooftop of my office building, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Texts, missed calls, voicemails stacking one after the other. For the first time in years, my family wanted my attention. The first voicemail was from Heather, her voice shrill and cracking. "You ruined my wedding! Do you have any idea what you've done? People were whispering about you instead of me." And Daniel, he's furious. "You'll regret this, Emily, you will." I played it twice, not because I cared about her rage, but because it was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard, the sound of power shifting. Heather had built her entire life on being untouchable, the golden child. For once she had been eclipsed, not by some stranger. By the sister she had mocked and dismissed at every turn. Daniel didn't call. He didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening. By revealing my company's success and our contract with his firm's competitor, I had struck at the one place he couldn't shrug off: his ego and his career. A man like Daniel thrived on image, and in one afternoon, I had shattered the illusion. Heather might have been able to forgive embarrassment. But Daniel? He would never forgive being made to look small. Their marriage had cracked before it even began. The calls from my parents came next. My father's voice was stern, almost panicked. "Emily, we need to talk. You should have told us about your company. We didn't realize how far you'd come." Didn't realize? They had never bothered to look. My mother's message was softer, but laced with her usual manipulation. "Emily, darling, why didn't you share this with us? You embarrassed your sister? We're family. We should stand together." I almost laughed. Now she wanted to stand together? After years of cutting me down, mocking me, and making me feel like a perpetual disappointment? The hypocrisy was suffocating. The fallout wasn't just inside my family. The city itself had seen me differently after that wedding. The video of the helicopter landing had gone viral within hours. Dozens of guests had posted it, their captions dripping with awe. Who is Emily Carter? The CEO who just shut down her entire family's insults in one move. Within days, new clients were reaching out. Investors wanted meetings. My agency, once a side hustle, was suddenly a force no one could ignore. I didn't just win back my dignity. I won a spotlight. That weekend, Lily came over with a bottle of champagne. We sat on my tiny balcony, clinking glasses under the city lights. "To Emily," she grinned. "The girl they said was nothing, who just proved she's everything." I laughed, the sound bubbling out of me freer than it had in years. But then I grew quiet. "Lily, why does it still hurt? Even after all this?" She tilted her head. "Because they're your family. You wanted love, not validation. But sometimes, all you can do is build a life so strong their words can't touch you anymore." Her words settled into me like truth. A week later, I received an email from someone I didn't expect, my cousin Sarah. She wrote, "Emily, I just want to say, you inspired me. I've always felt small at family gatherings too, always compared to Heather. But seeing what you did, it gave me courage." Thank you. Tears stung my eyes. For the first time, I realized my revenge wasn't just for me. It was for every quiet soul who had been shoved into the background. Every person told they were ordinary. Every dreamer dismissed. That night, as I closed my laptop, I noticed another voicemail waiting. This one wasn't from Heather or Daniel or even my parents. It was from the judge handling a major corporate case in the city, one that involved my company. And when I pressed play, his words froze me. "Ms. Carter, congratulations. I look forward to addressing you properly in court as CEO." The final stage of my revenge was waiting, and my family was about to watch me claim it in front of the world. The courthouse smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper, a mix of history and authority that made the air feel heavy. But when I walked through those marble doors, head high, I didn't feel small anymore. I felt unstoppable. The case that brought me here wasn't even about my family. It was about business, a contract dispute where my company had been pulled in as a key player. Rows of lawyers shuffled papers, executives whispered nervously, and reporters clicked their pens, hungry for headlines. I took my seat at the front, my company's legal team at my side. For a moment, I thought about how far I'd come, about the nights I'd cried in my tiny apartment, about the words my father had spat like poison, "You'll never be more than ordinary." And then the judge entered. All rise. Everyone stood. The room hushed. He glanced at the documents in front of him, then lifted his gaze. His voice echoed across the chamber. "Ms. Emily Carter, CEO of Carter Creative Agency, please step forward." The words struck like lightning. CEO, not a waitress. Not failure. Not invisible. CO. Somewhere in the back of the room, I heard the faintest gasp. My parents had come. They couldn't resist the spectacle. I didn't turn, but I felt their eyes burning into me, filled with disbelief and something else they had never directed at me before. Respect. Or was it fear? For once it didn't matter, because the name that left the judge's mouth was mine. And it wasn't just a name anymore. It was a crown I had built myself. The case itself went smoothly. My team presented the facts, the evidence spoke for itself, and when the gavel finally struck, it wasn't just victory for the company, it was validation of everything I had built. Reporters swarmed outside the courthouse, microphones flashing. "Ms. Carter, how does it feel to be one of the youngest CEOs to win such a landmark case? What's next for your agency? Did you ever imagine this moment?" I smiled, answering calmly, confidently. I always imagined it. I just had to stop letting other people tell me who I was, and the cameras loved it. Later, as I stepped into the sunlight, my parents stood waiting near the steps. Heather wasn't there, perhaps too ashamed, or perhaps still nursing her broken pride with Daniel. My father's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "Emily, I didn't know. I never thought—" I stopped him with a raised hand. "You didn't want to know. That's the difference." He flinched but said nothing. My mother tried next, her tone falsely sweet. "We're proud of you, darling. Truly. All those nights you worked so hard, it's paid off." I looked her straight in the eyes. "You mocked me when I was a waitress. You laughed when I was struggling. Don't rewrite history now," her smile faltered. For once, she had no weapon sharp enough to cut me down. That evening, back at my office, Lily popped a bottle of champagne again. To the CEO who made the world, and her family, finally see her worth. I laughed, shaking my head. "You know, Lily, I used to think revenge was about making them hurt, about throwing their words back at them. And now?" she asked. I leaned back, gazing at the city skyline glittering in the night. Now I know it's about freedom. Revenge isn't about them anymore. It's about proving to yourself that you were always more than their limits. I wasn't the girl crying in her apartment anymore. I wasn't the servant at family dinners, the failure in their eyes. I was Emily Carter, the CEO whose name they couldn't ignore, and whether my family ever truly respected me or not didn't matter anymore. Because I had built a life where their approval was irrelevant. So if you're still listening to my story, thank you. And if you've ever been told you'll never be enough, remember this: their words are not your destiny. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Would you forgive betrayal like this, or walk away forever? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.